loyalty is about loyalty to values and principle. It's loyalty to honor. It's not about loyalty to other people. But so much of our society gets that wrong. The underlying assumption when you speak the word loyalty is that there's another person on the other end that's going to receive what you're saying, right? That they're going to be the recipient of the loyalty, or that you're going to be the recipient of someone else's loyalty.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be together again, and I'm excited to have Captain Roger Hill with us, who, if you read the note I sent out, is the author of Dog Company, which was a fascinating book, I thought, and really well written about his experiences in Afghanistan and some of those dilemmas that, I think there are lessons we can learn from the situation he found himself in. We hopefully don't find ourselves in life and death situations like he and his platoon, but we do often find ourselves in ethical dilemmas and difficult situations and difficult decisions that come upon us quickly. And if we don't prepare in advance for what kind of person we're going to be and what matters most, those times are on us really quickly. And so I'm excited to hear a little bit in person from Roger about his story. And thought we might start off, just tell us a little bit about your background, some of your inspiration that led you to go to West Point and pursue a career in the Army, and then maybe a little bit about your story.
Sure. Thanks for having me, guys. It's an honor to share this time with you. I'm originally from Northeast Alabama, and joined the military by way of West Point in 2000. Spent about 10 years in the Army, and my inspiration for joining the military really was just a family legacy or history of service. So I'm a fourth generation veteran. My father also served, and just sort of watching that history played out inspired me to follow in their footsteps, more or less. The time that I spent in the military, I think I was overseas 4 times: Korea, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And of course, the story Dog Company is centered around my time in Afghanistan, but the time in Iraq is featured in the book somewhat as well, just because it played a critical role in the decision making, that experience, if you will, for the hard decisions I had to make in Afghanistan. My military service was really interesting. I got to do things kind of on 2 different spectrums, or ends of the spectrum, if you will. In 2005, as an example, I was helping lay President Reagan to rest during his interment at his library in Simi Valley. And then, so I'm in dress blues with a saber, decked out to the nines. And then 2 years later, I'm in Iraq, helping lead Iraqi soldiers through the streets of Ramadi during the surge of Ramadi. And then a year and a half later, I'm in Afghanistan, pre-surge Afghanistan, in that difficult situation. So I've got to see a lot in the military, but at sort of the company level and below. The leadership lessons that I've earned have in fact been earned the hard way. And right now I'm living in Atlanta. I live in a suburb of Atlanta called Roswell, just north of the Atlanta metro area. I work for the Georgia Tech Research Institute as a senior research engineer. And these days it mostly means I look at lots of spreadsheets and help manage the contractual aspects of, or the programmatic aspects of, a lot of different research and development work for engineers that are based out of Georgia Tech. So we're about 2,000 employees strong. We've got 8 labs spread across the Southeast, not just in Atlanta, but even outside of Atlanta. And for those 2,000 employees, Half of them are research engineers or scientists, the other half for support, and about 85% of our work is in support of Department of Defense research and development. So that's me.
That's awesome. Sounds like you're in some interesting work still.
Yeah, and no doubt, especially with the way the world is changing, before our eyes. There's just been so much change in the last few years. It's been really hard for the Department of Defense to kind of put their finger on what threats they want to focus on. There's definitely been a shift or a pivot, if you will, but guessing what that focus is going to be for the future is hard. Research and development is oftentimes 10, 12 years ahead of when a technology actually hits the ground and is put into a user's hands. So these pivots, these changes, this dynamic environment that we're in is challenging for our community in that way.
Well, I don't know how many folks on here have read the book. Would you like to go back and give a little bit of overview of just your time in Afghanistan and
Yeah,
what
I'd
you
love
learned
to.
from that?
Yeah, so I'll just start off by showing you what it looks like. There's two hardback, or I should say physical versions, if you will, versus electronic that are out. This is a paperback, and it's got a forward by Sean Hannity, and then that came out in 2018 and 2017. Of course, the hardback came out first, and those are available through my website, but also anywhere you can find books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, etc. And I think we're sitting at about between Audible and the paper and hardback versions, about 14 or 1500 reviews, and we're at 4.8 out of 5 stars. So it's received really good feedback. The book does have some presence. It's 425 pages long, so it's not a short read, but I've heard people reading it in one sitting because they felt it was that gripping and that compelling. And the story starts off with me in command of a company called Dog Company, which is one of several in the Band of Brothers Regiment, and that's the same Band of Brothers Regiment that's in the HBO series that Tom Hanks helped produce and direct. And we're set in 2008, going into Afghanistan, to Eastern Afghanistan, just before the surge in 2010. So, the surge is usually a reaction to things not going well, right? That's what we saw in Iraq. Afghanistan was no different. Things in Afghanistan were not. Sorry, I know there's a little bit of glare there. Maybe you can see me better. So in Afghanistan, things are getting pretty busy, as we like to say, or pretty difficult. A lot of enemy activity, and so when our company hit the ground, there was already talks of maybe needing to bring in more troops because the line was spread so thin. I'm going to kind of truncate parts of this just for the sake of time, and so we can have some more discussion on the back end. The long and short of it is I had an 89-man strong heavy weapons company in a province called Wardak, which is about the size of Connecticut. And after about 6 months, we had taken about 24 wounded, to include a couple of guys killed. And we couldn't figure out what the heck was going on, because the area that we went to or were assigned was supposed to be a peaceful area on the whole. And what ended up happening is that because coalition forces had thought that area was largely peaceful, the enemy got smart to that idea and began to use that area as a rest and refit area for their operations and attacks for Kabul, the capital city of Afghanistan. And so when we showed up and we started to patrol in areas that had not been patrolled previously, we started to get hammered. And every time we go out on an ambush, we'd get hit. When we were back on the base, we were getting mortared or rocketed on a regular basis. After about 6 months and a couple of dozen wounded and a couple of killed, we discovered through intelligence that we had 12 spies operating on our base. And the spies were in the form of translators that worked directly for me. My personal translator ended up being one of the ringleaders of this group. But then we also had folks that were cleaning, that were doing construction work, just a lot of day labor type activities or work that we were forced to hire to support our operations because we had so few troops on the ground. And so that's kind of a byproduct of what people call an economy of force operation, which is what Afghanistan was relative to Iraq. All the emphasis, all the resources was going to Iraq at that time. And so Afghanistan sort of got the leftovers, if you will, and the technical term or the doctrinal term for that is economy of force. So Afghanistan was that. And then within Afghanistan, the province that I was in charge of was an economy of force operation inside of an economy of force operation. So we were definitely sucking on hind tit all the way around. When I found out that we had spies on our base, I pulled those 12 in, sent up reports to my higher command. And as you can tell from the title of the book, it's Dog Company, A True Story of American Soldiers Abandoned by Their High Command. The word that we wanted to use instead of abandoned was betrayed. A true story of American soldiers betrayed by their high command. When the lawyers got involved, they said that the language betrayed was too strong, so we had to settle on abandoned. So that little bit of foreshadowing there, my command did not react well to the news of these 12 spies. And in Afghanistan at that time, there was a rule of engagement known as the 96-hour rule, where if you couldn't press charges against enemy combatants within 4 days or 96 hours, you had to release them. I had many situations where we had caught people in the middle of a firefight, or other cases where we had caught them trying to conduct reconnaissance on us. And my command literally told me to give them cab fare, walk them to the front gate, call a cab so that they could hitch a ride out of the area. And that's how we dealt with catching enemy, fighters, spies, all the above. So in this situation, the same thing happened. I was basically left to just deal with it on my own. But the circumstances around catching these 12, especially my translator, was a little different in as much as that the 12 that we caught had been living on our base. And so they knew all the ins and outs of our operations, our schedule. They knew where all the sensitive sites were. And so I found it really unsettling and too much of a risk to assume to just simply let them go. So when my command wouldn't retrieve them, I decided to interrogate them myself. In doing so, I ended up firing my weapon into the ground in the vicinity of a handful of detainees to scare them into talking. They gave up intelligence. The intelligence was good because we were able to vet it against other intelligence. And that allowed for another agency to pull those spies off my hands and take them off the battlefield for a short period of time and give me a chance to reset on my base. But alternatively, or in parallel, rather, it set in motion a whole set of events where my command decided that what I had done was psychological torture. They initiated an investigation, removed me from command, investigated me for war crimes for psychologically torturing these confirmed spies, and really just created a really unnecessarily bigger set of circumstances. And so the long and short of it is I found myself in a legal battle for my life, facing the potential of prison time. Obviously that didn't happen, and I lived or made it out okay to tell the story. So one of the cool things that came out of all this is there was a lot of media coverage, and I was able to partner with indirectly Senator Lindsey Graham out in South Carolina to do an investigative special through CNN, of all networks. Was the most professional network, at least at the time, that we were dealing with, in the way of providing a thorough investigation of the facts. And when that investigation was complete and General David Petraeus was interviewed as a part of that, they ended up rolling back that 96-hour rule, and they turned the time standard into 14 days. Now, of course, I never got credit for any of that. And the Army is never going to apologize to me, as big corporate entities never do to the little people. But I do take great pride in having stood my ground and affecting some really positive change for soldiers and Marines that are actually on the ground doing the dirty deed of fighting for our country. So that's it.
If you have questions, type them in the chat and I'll open you up. I think there are incredible lessons from how fast that ethical dilemma comes on you. And folks in the work world will have that, where there's pressure to do something, pressure to push the boundaries. But this truly, from my understanding, in you and your troops' heart, was life and death decision, that if you release these people, you were in imminent danger.
Yeah, that was definitely my perspective. And I would go as far as to say no one else has the right to second guess that perspective, right? And that's after years and years of processing this information and thinking about it and second guessing even my own decisions, because that's what we do, right? We're really critical of the decisions that we made, especially in hindsight. And I really do believe that regardless of where the facts would have fell in the end, I still had to make the right to make that decision based on the information that I had at that time. Now, it turns out that the information that I thought I had was the information I in fact had. And the decisions I made were valid because my command was not supporting me as they should. But those decisions can come on you fast or quickly, and they can have grave consequences, to your career and your organization. Literally, in the flip of a switch. And so that was the case with me. I mean, my career was over in an instant. As soon as I stood my ground and made that decision within that 4-day window of time, I was done with the military. I was persona non grata, and the military did everything they could to smear me and prevent me from speaking. So one of the things that's interesting in the book is it's got a handful of redactions in it because I had to fight to get the story out. And in order to compromise with the Pentagon to allow for the story to be published, I had to redact some of the sensitive material in it.
Let's go to Marilyn.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for your service and for your courage. I come from a very military family also. We have had someone in the military ever since 1776. So
Wow.
come from, and have them now. In fact, my grandson, we're going to see him next week. He just graduated from Marine Corps boot camp, and we're going to see him for Thanksgiving. So I'm really excited about that.
Wow.
But my question is, how did you identify the spies? How did you know that that's who they were?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So great question. One of the capabilities we had in country at the time was the ability to intercept signals communication being radios, cell phone conversations, anything that's passing through the air that requires a radio frequency. And so we were able to capture, through the help of another organization that provided that capability on the ground in Afghanistan, intercept those communications and then trace the phone calls to existing network diagrams of known bad players, confirmed bad players in the area. And so one, we knew what the communications were, and then we knew the nefarious nature of the people that our folks on the base were talking to. So it was vetted a couple of times over for those 12. We believe that there were probably a couple of dozen or more dirty or bad guys, if you will, on our base, but we could only confirm through incontrovertible evidence, the 12. So I only speak of the 12, even though I suspect there were more.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question.
Father Justin.
Sure. I wrote in the chat, very often when we face serious potential negative outcomes like you did, whether it's personal and or for those that we lead, we begin to question our own more.
We lost you there for a second, Father Justin.
Yeah, the devil does that to me all the time. Right when I'm about to make a great point, he freezes my screen.
You want to do that again?
Am I with you? Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Yeah, sorry, I'll try to be quick. Often when we're making big decisions and we face potential negative outcomes that are personal, we get unexpected results that come back. Think about a lawsuit that goes the wrong way, or a decision that your high command doesn't support you in that they should. You begin to question your own reasoning. You begin to question your own moral standing. Did I make the right decision? Am I in the right?
Yeah.
How did you remain steadfast in the midst of that potential negative outcome? And are there any practices, daily or other leadership practices, that you used in order to remain steadfast in those moments of uncertainty before the decisions had come down? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I guess I should start by saying I didn't do well with that. I mean, I questioned myself constantly in the beginning, and I really believe that if it weren't for the values that my parents and the community that I grew up in raised me with, to really see the world and the decisions we make as being black and white when the time comes that black and white is required. I mean, there's times when you're forced to choose one side or the other, and you can't walk down the middle. And this was one of them times. And I had a great upbringing in that way. Again, not just my parents, my mother and father, but also the church that I grew up in, the community, the school that I was raised through. So really, I fell back on, this is what I've always known. And, Randy and I talked about this a little bit last week when we were, first coordinating for this call. It is truly a lifetime of shaping. These big decisions or these small decisions, I believe, are a lot of small decisions you make through an iterative process over the course of a lifetime or a long period of time, so that when the big decision comes, it becomes habit. And so I know it's probably obvious, or even so obvious to the point of being a cliche, but you really are, these big decisions are an extension of the decisions that we make every day, even the little ones, as far as your character goes and what you're willing to stand for, when the chips are down.
Mike Kinney's about to ask what I was about to ask as well. I wanted to see if you ever gained any insight. Mike, why don't you ask your question?
Hey, Mike.
Absolutely. Beat Navy, brother. Beat Navy.
Beat Navy. Amen to that.
Yeah. Hey, first of all, great stuff. I'm gonna have to get your book and read it. God bless you. But I think we've all heard plenty of stories, I hate to say, like this, where it seems ground truth be damned. And, a lot of our troops are I'll say, subject to very unrealistic rules of engagement, et cetera, without, pointing fingers necessarily. I mean, what do you attribute, I'll say, your chain of command's rationale for that complete lack of support to? I mean, I'm sure you're like me in that I'll overanalyze the hell out of things, and much to Father Justin's point, did I make the right? Did I not see something?
Yeah.
Did I not understand the big picture? It seems very cut and dry from my perspective, and I'm sure yours as well. But did you ever get any sense or any geez, I'm not going to say excuses, but any rationale from the chain of command as to why you were subjected to, what I think we would all consider very unrealistic expectations?
No, I really appreciate that. Man, I'll just say again, I really questioned myself over and over again. There's probably still times even today, where it was such a significant experience in my life where it comes up subconsciously, and I still ponder on things because you have an experience in life and then you look at a past experience through a different lens or perspective, and so I still wrestle with this, even the decisions I'm talking about with you today. Something that gave me closure recently was the release or the publishing of the Afghan papers, and that was in 2019, much like the Vietnam papers decades ago. And in the Afghan papers, there was the center of that sort of investigative piece done by the Washington Post was that they had interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of senior officials for the George W. Bush and the Obama and even the Trump administrations on what they thought basically of our experience and what we were doing in Afghanistan. And the data, if you were to break it up into buckets, almost to a T, everyone from the lowest person they interviewed, which was probably, sort of the rank of 06, a colonel, on up to folks with multiple stars or people who are on staff in those various administrations. Even the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, who, in my book was the deputy commanding general. And I'll just go ahead and say it, I don't mind pointing fingers at this point, but he looked the other way in my case, but has been a part of this Afghanistan problem set, if you will, for a long time, greater than a decade, if you will, and is now, in a major role for the current administration. These folks, almost to a man, lied in public about what they thought was going on in Afghanistan, but in private were willing to share very direct and feedback as to what they really thought. And their very direct feedback in private through this Inspector General set of interviews was that we had no task, we had no purpose, we had no mission in Afghanistan. We were just there as an extension of the political process to appease, whatever administration was in power at that point in time. That's the general consensus. So I feel like when I look at all of this in its totality, I stood with courage for something, and I still believe the decision that I made was correct, and I held the same convictions in private as I did in public. And the people that were appointed over me, my chain of command, all the way up to the highest levels, because the situation I faced with Dog Company in Wardak was just an extension of the overall problem set of Afghanistan, right? It was just a trickle down, if you will. And so these people would say one thing in public to appease their public masters, and in private had a totally different set of opinions or perspective. And those people are far more educated, have a far greater experience in the profession or in their different professions as it relates to the Afghanistan problem set than I did, but they didn't have the courage to speak their convictions. So I hope that answers it.
No, that's perfect, brother. I mean, that's kind of, I'll speak for myself. That's my assessment too.
Yeah.
Which is
we need to get.
Really
we shouldn't be
disconcerting.
Well, and if no one can really describe why we should be there, then we should get the hell out. And I went to Iraq and Afghanistan, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, expecting to help change the world. 10, 15 years ago, Iraq first and then Afghanistan. And over time and research and just really wrestling with these questions, we had no real justification for being in either one of those theaters to the extent that we were. I understand going after bad people in a very surgical or targeted manner, but we've gone over there basically empire building. or at least that's the perception that those countries have of us. And that perception is reality, and it's created far more damage. All of those people that operate, in the level of the administration that they do, or at the senior levels of the military, or all these people that operate in these think tanks that advise the political process or the military industrial complex to make the decisions that they make, they all know this. But I think we are increasingly in an age where people lack the courage to speak their own perspectives worth of truth for fear of not going along with the majority narrative. Because we know the majority narrative gets canceled or gets punished, in some informal or formal way. So, really, this is a story about having the courage to say and do what you believe, right? At its essence, and that's timeless.
Appreciate you, brother. God bless
Yep.
you.
Yes, sir.
Be
Thank
Navy.
you. Be Navy.
Let's go to Steve Johns.
Hey, Roger.
Steve, you better get out of the road, man. I bet those cars are moving fast on that strip of highway you're on.
That's a beautiful part of this country. You should go check out Utah sometime.
Yes, sir.
Gosh, blessings to you, Roger, for the courage that you displayed and your service and in telling your story.
Thank you.
I don't have the words to describe the respect I have for you for what you've done. I had a similar experience in corporate America, and when two of my peers, all of us who reported to the chief executive officer, two of my peers went to jail.
Wow.
When I stood up and spoke out, I was told that's not the kind of leadership we want around here. In corporate America, we just work out a severance agreement. But that was 5 years of misery for myself and my family.
Yeah.
I don't want to take the spotlight away from you, Roger. Your experience was far more significant, and your courage just beyond my words to describe. So thank you again for that. If you would spend a little time talking about your family and their support to you for throughout that period of time, and then secondly, how has that experience shaped your life, both personally and professionally, going forward? And thank you again.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for sharing too. And I'm sorry you had to live through such a difficult and challenging experience. One of the things I'll say on that note is that, and I guess I'll answer this in reverse. The experience that I had in Afghanistan, the experience that you spoke to in the corporate world, has only solidified my willingness to stand for what I believe in. I don't want to say that I pursue fighting for what I think is right with reckless abandon. That's unwise and creates unnecessary collateral at times. But I have learned to listen to that voice that can only be refined with experience and time. And there's a faith component of this as well, where I know where I'm going to end up at the end of this short period that we spend on this earth with one another. And so I've decided that fighting for justice and honor and making these sorts of hard decisions is worship. And I think it's worship of the highest kind. And so that's just, how I've come out of all this is that even in the experiences I've had in the corporate world, a couple of years ago, I got let go by a company that I thought was going to be my forever company. And we manufactured and sold body cameras to law enforcement. And I loved the technology. I thought I loved the team that I was a part of. But it turns out that a couple of the senior sales guys were selling a beta version of our software, and it wasn't really live, but selling it as live. And when I raised the issue, I was told I was disloyal. And so I guess the next point that I'd like to tease out of that experience, and I think the experience that you were starting to speak of, is that one of the lessons that I had to learn, here like halfway through my life, and I'm sorry it took so long for me to learn this, but in the military, we talked a lot about loyalty, and it's one of the values that you're rated on in your performance evaluations. It took me way too long to learn and understand that loyalty is about loyalty to values and principle. It's loyalty to honor. It's not about loyalty to other people. But so much of our society gets that wrong. The underlying assumption when you speak the word loyalty is that there's another person on the other end that's going to receive what you're saying, right? That they're going to be the recipient of the loyalty, or that you're going to be the recipient of someone else's loyalty. And so what I teach my family, you mentioned family and how they've, their support has been mostly, helping round out my perspective and providing me a safe place to process. And in that safe place to process, what I've learned and what I teach my kids and even the people that I work with, the teams that I lead or support, is that there's this circle called honor and justice. And as long as you stand in that circle, honor, justice, truth, integrity, whatever, all those words for me have a duality. They're all words to describe God. God is truth. God is justice. God is loyalty. God is honor. God is integrity. Those are words that you can substitute for him. As long as you stand in that circle with me, we can be loyal to one another, because I'm going to stay loyal to all the things that are in that circle. If you step out of that circle, I might can extend my hand to try to pull you back in, but I'm not stepping out of it. And so the concept of loyalty is one of the things that has been refined and solidified in me. And I have a passion, to kind of share and teach, other people about, especially my children, because I think it's something that I got so wrong, and that our culture gets so wrong, because we are about being loyal to whatever tribe we think we're in or identify with, or, and we've completely lost sight of, we're blind to the values and principles that we really all have in common, because God, the Creator, wired us to have this similar set of values and principles. But our concept, our perspective of what loyalty is, has twisted that for us. And so I've carried that into my corporate experience as well, and with a cost, like you. But it's a cost I'm willing to pay, because I think it's a sweet incense to our Father in heaven. So small price to pay.
Roger, if I can, as a follow-up, thank you for mentioning your family and your children. I personally believe that the most important thing we do on this planet is to have children and to raise them with a strong set of values. So those words are that we can find them in the dictionary, but as a parent, being intentional with your children, what little things do you do with them to explain what values are and how to live those values?
Oh my gosh. We're in a season right now where we're in a fierce fight for two of my kids. So the woman that I was married to in the story Dog Company was very supportive of me through what happened in my military service, and even beyond. And we came apart for reasons that probably aren't appropriate, nor do we have the time to discuss here. But nonetheless, we're not together anymore. We had 2 beautiful children together. I'm remarried. I have 3 additional children, so I have a total of 5 split between 2 households. And one of the points of contention between our 2 households is exactly what you said. It's how we choose to raise the kids. We're on different ends of the spectrum. I believe in truth always. Kids bring the darndest things to you, and you can choose to tell a white lie to make it easy on yourself. And what you think is going to be easier on them, or you can wrestle with giving them truth, but explaining it on a level that they can consume and is appropriate for them. And that's hard. It's like I work with a bunch of really heavy-brained researchers, and they're very good at explaining things ad nauseum. They're really, really good physicists and scientists and engineers that I work with are able to explain things very quickly and on a level that's commensurate with whoever they're speaking to. And so that's, I think, to me, really our primary goal, in raising kids is to raise them up, with honor and integrity. And you can only do that if you lead by example, even in those everyday instances or situations with them. And so it's hard, but for me, it's worth the effort because I know what the end product is going to look like. I don't say that to sound self-congratulatory, but I'm happy with who I am and what I stand for. And I want my little ones, especially my young men, to be men who will stand for honor, to have courage. And that can only happen if I do it every day, even with the little things or even with the uncomfortable subjects or topics. I've got to find a way to give them truth on their level at their age. And if I shy away from answering questions, little ones know when you're doing that. They may not be able to articulate it, but they can sense it in your spirit and in your energy. And I want them to know that I'm going to give it 100%, every explanation, every topic, and that they're going to get truth every time, because there's going to come a time when they really need me. And I don't want them to question whether or not they can come to me when they need me, because that's often a barrier, I think, for children as they get older. Is they know when they need to go to someone, but they don't know that they can. And I want to eliminate that barrier. I want to mitigate that risk little by little every day by giving them truth, no matter what.
Let's go to Drew.
Hey, Roger, you damn West Pointers got to watch out for you.
I almost wore your shirt today. We were almost in the same uniform.
It's okay. Hey,
I've got the same one.
I hope you find yourself stuck in Kansas City someday soon, because I really would like to shake on you a little while, just because.
Yeah, let's do it.
But it goes back to your story is a very powerful one. Being a leader, a small unit leader in Somalia, and then being a senior leader in Iraq, very different perspectives, both of them very similar when it comes to the human dimension. My question is more about your faith. I've been going through this for a while. Just listening to your answer to Steve John's question was a powerful one, because I think there's some correlations between what that crazy institution beat into your head for 4 years, and what you say and what I feel and what I say and what Mike says, and it's just a powerful tool for us. My question is, a very good friend of mine here in Kansas City, his wife and son died of cancer the same month, same year, literally the same year I was getting shot at in Somalia. And he talks a lot about bitter versus better. And I think it goes back to my question, which is how your faith has decided, how you've used your faith in your decision making. And how are you using it now? Because I think the biggest piece that I think everybody, at least me included here in this room, wants to hear is not about the experience, but how you've used that experience to define the person that you need to be, rather than consume the person that you are. How are you managing that? How are you balancing that? Because I know I can learn an awful lot from the trauma that you've experienced, because I think we've all experienced it together, but how we all develop from it is so powerful. And I know Mike works with this and veterans all the time, but I'll be honest with you, I don't know if I don't need a school on it. I just need a bunch of veterans to sit down and talk about our faith and not being afraid to share the fact that we're looking at that man in the mirror. And Randy, I talked about this when I talked on the show, which is I only answer to really one person, which is that person in the mirror. How are you managing that? How are you balancing that? Where have been your struggles since as you transition and you continue to transition?
Not always well, but I guess some things that I feel like are starting to work for me. Like I'm in my 40s now, and I feel like I didn't start making consistently decent decisions till I turned 40. And so I'm looking forward to smoother sailing, I hope. Not in the way of the consequences, which can be good or bad, but not in the way of negative consequences to my decision making. I just want peace.
The good news is you started at 40. I was a little bit later than you. I'm a little bit slower. I guess the Corps got smarter people after I left.
Oh, that's good. So, Father, what would you have me do? And then once I'm able to hear his voice, which isn't always going to come immediately, right? But that's such an important question. Father, what would you have me do? And then once you get that, I think the next question has to be, when would you have me do it? And how is also in there as well, because I know personally, because I have a somewhat of a strident personality, and I am not afraid of confrontation. I find confrontation to be worship to him as well. And that's another thing where, we've become such an effeminate society that we think confrontation means aggression. Aggression's not bad, but somehow we've labeled aggression as being bad as well. And so before you know it, you don't have men. You have males who are not men. And I don't mean to turn this into a gender study, or a pseudo faith-based gender study discussion, but I have to ask that question, how, because my delivery is not always spot on. So I need guidance with that as well. But Father, what would you have me do? Okay. When would you have me do it? Okay. And how, given the obstacles that I face in terms of delivery, would you have me do this? Because I want peace. I want peace with you. I want peace with my brothers and sisters. And sometimes there's not peace with your brothers and sisters. I think we live in an increasingly difficult time from that perspective. I think people are on opposite ends of the spectrum. I think it's less than what's being hyped up from a PSYOP perspective. I think there's less of that going on than people think, but perception can be reality. But that's really kind of where I am in the moment. I hope that makes sense.
I think it does. I appreciate that. But like I said, please reach out if you do find yourself in Kansas City, because do you know Tim Wright really well?
Sounds really familiar.
Tim isn't one of your classmates, is he?
Yeah, he's a 2000 guy.
Tim was
He
one of
was-
my lieutenants. And,
Was he? Yeah.
Again, just an incredibly strong young man, but I would just love to sort of catch up with you and sort of, because I think there's an awful lot we could do to help each other when it comes to sort of dealing with, you know, decisions we've made. You know, you make decisions, you can't change those decisions, but finding peace in those decisions is really important.
Yeah.
So best of luck. And again, it was great listening to you.
Yeah, I think I'll just say one last thing on that. And I think Tim is a 2000 classmate with me, so we're the same year group. But we're trained to shoot, move, and communicate, right? And so the word shoot, I think, is etched into our subconscious, which means action. And then, like the ass end of that is action as well the middle of that's move, which is also action, but it's got to be communication first. I've had to rewire my brain and heart to seek a channel of communication with the tower so that I could be open to instruction. And then how do I shoot? How do I move once I've achieved communication? It's taken, for me personally, it's been a monumental struggle because I'm a shoot and move guy first and communicate what I've done later. So bless you. Thank you.
Let's go to Marcus.
All right. How are you doing?
Hey, Marcus.
Once again, thank you for all you do. Thank you for your service. So, I'm in that same boat of it's taken me a while. I mean, I've always tried to live by integrity and do things the right way, but I tend to escalate things in my mind and then I go in guns blazing. But kind of my question is, in the process, I've been reading this book called Crucial Accountability and plan to move on to the book Crucial Conversation. And it talks about the process of asking yourself what and if, what is it that you want to address and if you should address it. And so kind of with your situation and some of the situations that you've had, how have you approached that? I understand, I'm a man of faith. My faith is very important to me, but how do you figure out the what and if? What should I be addressing and how I should address it, and if I should address it, and if I am addressing the correct thing, because it's, as it talks about discussions, it's so easy to get off into the weeds of the wrong thing. So hopefully that's clear. It's probably clear as mud, but that's just kind of the thought I was asking.
No, I'll take that's a great question. I'll take a stab at it. So, I think one of the things that technology has done to really hurt what I would call leadership bandwidth over the last 20, 30 years is it's given us the ability to micromanage to a level that no one would have ever dreamed possible, because you can watch and observe and status so many things because of information technology, the advantage that it gives us today. And I think good leaders, and I try to do this in dog company. I don't know that I'd have been able to articulate it, 10 years ago like I can now, but even then I would have said, you've got to create an organization that can run on its own. And so I think you, as a good leader, you have to be, if you're leading, a team, whether it's your family or an organization, you've got to really work to seek out the enemy. And the enemy is, micromanagement. And micromanagement is on the other end of the spectrum, or the inverse of risk reduction, because when you're always doing everything and then you're removed, then the organization has a greater chance of, falling on its face. If you create redundancy to the point to where if you get hit by a bus or something happens, or you do that at every level, critical juncture, if you will, in the organization, then it can largely continue moving forward without your presence or the presence of other key leaders. The other byproduct of that, and I know that's talked a lot about, in business school, it's written about, in curriculum. I mean, it seemed to be all they talked about in organizational effectiveness for the, the MBA program I went through not too long ago. Like, I get it, everybody talks about that. But the byproduct of doing that I think is equally important for a leader of an organization is it frees up bandwidth for you as a leader to meditate on solving bigger, more strategic problems for your organization. And so you have to have the urgency of handing off responsibility to the point to where the organization can run on its own, so you can truly be free to move around and move about almost as an omnipotent being. And I don't want to make this sound weird or anything, but you got to have the flexibility to pop in and pop out of anywhere in your organization so that you can truly survey it and understand from top to bottom what's going on. And that means leadership by walking around, having conversations with people that are on the floor of the warehouse, to, being able to pop into a C-level, meeting, with the executive team when necessary, and everything in between, being able to travel and check on things at your field sites, et cetera. You have to work to get to that point in order to really set your organization up for success. That has to be the goal. You never get there, I think, because the world isn't perfect. But the more bandwidth you can create for yourself just to observe, I think the bandwidth itself is 80% of solving that problem. And I'm just throwing that percentage out there arbitrarily, because I feel like it could be greater, it could be less, but just having the bandwidth to wrestle with the problems in itself, creating that bandwidth is the biggest challenge I think a lot of us face for the teams that we run and manage.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's eye-opening. I mean, it's almost, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about Nehemiah as he goes to rebuild the wall, and he walks around for 3 days observing and understanding his situation before he really addresses the people and lets them know why he's there. So
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Sorry, I have to go. Our Wi-Fi is messed up and my wife is a teacher, so I need to make sure she can teach. So thank you very much for what you do.
Speaking of bandwidth, yeah.
Yeah.
Take care, Marcus.
Thank you. Thanks, Randy.
Yes,
I want to jump to Maddie real quick because I think her question's in line with kind of where you're at, and then we're going to go back to Bob right after that. So Maddie, you still there?
Did you say me?
I said you. I've missed you. I haven't seen you in a couple weeks.
I know. I miss you all too. I was so compelled by the story that I drove all the way to work, completely forgot my brownies for our Thanksgiving today, have to drive back, and so I'm a little distracted, but I have my eyes on the road. Okay, I swear. My question was, what is the difference, or like when you remain silent, or when you are faced with an opportunity to be silent or to speak up, and you choose silence, how do you know if that is prudence of the situation, of not saying anything because you make it worse, or just cowardice? And I feel like you've been talking about this a lot, and so if it's a redundant question, I apologize, but I've been thinking about it a lot, and the power of being silent because of cowardice, and then that grows a resentment inside, which can maybe become worse than the original thing that you're trying to stand up against, if that makes sense. The resentment being almost that poison in your own heart that you're trying to give somebody else or give some situation. but you're drinking it yourself. So those are just kind of the thoughts that were coming to mind during all this conversation. It's fascinating, and I'd appreciate any of your additional thoughts on that. And you can mute me, Randy, if you can.
I'm with Travis. That's a great question. To be honest, I don't know that there is in my opinion, sort of a decision tree that helps you work through that. I'll tell you what I think I've done in my life, and I did this in dog company as well. And I'll kind of give a vignette as well, I think, in the process of describing this. We were being forced to shut down an outpost, and there was an outpost that earlier in that summer had been overrun, and they just made a movie about it. I think it's called Outpost. It's been on either Netflix or I think it's Amazon Prime. It's got Orlando Bloom in it. And so just a couple of months prior to my situation in Afghanistan, this outpost got overrun, and it was intense, and it was hairy, and a lot of guys died, a lot of guys got hurt, and it was just a bad public relations situation for the United States and the Army specifically. And so General Milley, who's now the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was then the Deputy Commanding General, started flying around Afghanistan evaluating outposts to see if we needed to close them down or not, to see if they were at risk. And he wanted to close down some outposts in our area, which I agreed with given the limited amount of resources, but I thought a better solution would have been just to give us more resources so we can man the outpost effectively and not be at such a high risk. But he opted to shut them down. And I really felt like it was one of those fall on your sword decisions that I needed to approach the chain of command and tell them that they were making a really bad decision. And that if I were just silent and allowed them to make the decision without my input, the guy who was representing the 100 or so guys that were on the ground living and breathing and fighting for that terrain day in and day out for the better part of a year, that if our input wasn't considered, that I was doing something not just dishonorable, but I felt like to an extent it was unethical as well. I felt like they were making a decision in a vacuum. It was a reaction to something that had happened in a different part of Afghanistan. So I pulled in a group of my company, probably 14 or 15 guys. So kind of like mid-level leaders on up to kind of senior level leaders within the company. So in a company, there's a captain or a company commander, which is me. Then you have a non-commissioned officer who's your right-hand man or woman, if it were. And then you have 4 platoons. Each has a lieutenant and a platoon sergeant. And so those leaders of those organizations within my company, I pulled them in, and then I pulled in a select few of people that I felt like carried a greater than normal or better than average level of maturity, which was not uncommon for me. And I described the situation. I said, I think I need to reach out to the Deputy Commanding General, which is me jumping a couple of levels of the chain of command and reaching out directly to the man and saying, here's what I think. But that's at risk, right? Because when you start jumping the chain of command in a highly structured and regimented organization like the military, there could be consequences. One of which is you could be called disloyal by the chain of command that you're going around. But I had already made my case to them, and they basically ignored me and decided not to pass it up to that higher level. So I ended up traveling. I took a flight, basically, to Bagram to try to meet with the Deputy Commanding General in person. But I didn't just make that decision on my own. I pulled in like 12 or 14 people in my company who had all bled and sweat, had skin in the game, who had seen us, toil over this terrain and the people that we were trying to secure and protect. And I'm not going to say we voted, but I strongly considered their input. And so I would say that if you ever find yourself in the middle of making a decision like that by yourself, then you're wrong. You need to have a community around you that you are constantly bouncing ideas off of. And they maybe don't need to be, like in my case, those people were inside of, and so there, you could say that there was somewhat of a conflict of interest because they were inside of the organization. But it might be better, and you know, and I have more latitude to do this now in my personal and professional life, to have people outside of that can help you think through all the pros and cons to making that decision. And in a way, you're surveying a larger group of people that you trust who may not be vested in the situation other than to see the best outcome for you, to help you make that decision. Because I don't know that if those decisions are really hard, if I was ever equipped to make them on my own. And that's assuming that, you know, I couldn't hear from the Lord in that moment. I really do try to get to that place of quiet and stillness where I can hear the voice of the Holy Spirit. And if I can, I'm done. That's all I need. But in those instances that I can't, then I really need the counsel of others. And it takes time to build a community like that. And it takes time to maintain it, because you need to invest when those people need your opinion and insight as well, so that you can reciprocate. I hope that's okay.
Okay, the view of the current drawdowns that have been announced.
Yes, sir. Are you asking what I think about them?
Yeah, I guess he's asking what your, yeah, his question in the chat here was, what was your view of the current drawdowns?
Yeah.
So this is something I actually do travel and speak on a lot, which
yes,
runs a risk of me going on ad nauseum about it. So, in short, we need to get out of the Middle East and Iraq and Afghanistan specifically. We don't have what I would consider the moral high ground, a solid justification for being there. We probably never should have gone in the capacity that we have been. I could go back and cite several different manuals.
Group podcast thing. I just had a question. I'm sorry. I thought you could get in without looking at.
There we go.
Good. I could go back and cite different references that speak to the amount of boots you need on the ground in order to properly secure a counterinsurgency. And that's if you even believe that you should be there to begin with. But let's say that we assume that we should be in Iraq and Afghanistan and should have been there for the last 15, 20 years. Then we've not properly resourced the fight, or the mission. We've not even come close to properly resourcing those theaters. And so what you're doing is you're setting soldiers and Marines up for failure. And so my book, Dog Company, is sort of an outcome of not providing the right level of resourcing in those types of endeavors. So that's just focused on the Middle East. But and a lot of people don't know this, but most of you probably do. We've got military installations in over 800 countries. I'm sorry, we have over 800 installations, military installations in 130 different countries currently. And I think we got to start pulling back. I don't think we have any business being all over the world all the time, trying to shape every tidbit of foreign policy that we can. We've got our hands in too much, and there's far too much going on in our country that requires our federal government's attention. And we've meddled and extended ourselves, I think, to the point to where we can't take care of ourselves. So I'm all for pulling back. I'm not saying that I believe in isolation. I think we should take care of our allies and our neighbors, of course. But we're on the other end of that spectrum. I mean, we are truly an interventionist nation, and we believe, as demonstrated by our, last 50 years worth of foreign policy, that we have a right to be everywhere, influencing everything with our military all the time. And I think it's ridiculous.
So if you could go back to 20-year-old Roger, and now you have these 40 years of life lessons, what do you wish you knew as 20-year-old Roger to get ready for where you're at today?
I don't know. You should have sent me that question before we started. I certainly wish that I had given more credence to my faith. But then again, I don't know that my faith would be as strong as it is today without the experience and the failures that I've experienced. And so I'm thankful for that. And I don't know that I would go back and change anything, because I really can appreciate, despite all the heartache, a lot of it self-inflicted, not just professionally, but personally. This is kind of a side note, but I have 4 boys and 1 girl, and my daughter's got me wrapped around her finger. And I can't help but think that if I could have had my daughter Emma when I was in my 20s, I'd be an amazing human being today. Because there's something about being a father, and then for me personally, being a father of a daughter, that has really softened some of my rough edges and made me a much better human being than I was 20 years ago. So I don't know if that's possible, like for us to have like avatar children at an earlier age. Like I know that in home ec, when we were in high school, they made people carry around, fake babies to give them the experience of caring for something outside of themselves. Maybe that's a technology problem we can solve, but I just know on a personal level, it's done a lot to grow me, that little girl.
Well, I'll tell you, that definition that you provided midway through here on loyalty, that was unique, and I loved that. That's worth you writing down and putting on a plaque for people to put on the wall, because that would really, I think, help guide all of us. Steve's story is not unique. I know countless people that have ended up in those ethical dilemmas at work, where push the boundaries just a little bit, just one time, just to make the quarter, just to make the year, just to hit a bonus target, and you don't go over the chain of command, and you don't go around your boss, and you just do it. And it just pushes your soul a little closer to the edge of the cliff a little more each time. And somebody like Steve had the courage to stand up and say, no, I can't do that. Sometimes people are afraid. In your case, there was fear of life and death. Other people have real fear of unemployment, impact on their family, impact on their career. So I love what you said here today. It's just a lot of good meat to help prepare for those tough days.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for spending so much time with us. This was awesome.
Yeah, my pleasure. And
anyone ask questions or comments from anyone?
Well, I don't know. I've got more time on my calendar, and I already talked too much, but it's sort of a different direction if you'll take a minute, since you're in this world of technology and you're working with things that are 10 years ahead of what we're dealing with now, without revealing any corporate secrets. I'm wondering, what technology are we looking for coming forward from 10 years. That'll affect our businesses and our personal life.
Yeah, I think you have to really, if you're looking to the future, you've got to look at electronic warfare, and that includes cyber, but in a, platform on platform, machine on machine, we're becoming more autonomous. And in order to control autonomous platforms, you have to maintain a signal. And then for autonomous platforms to defeat one another, it's not a kinetic engagement anymore. It's deceptions. You're creating signals that make you think there's something there when there's not, or that it's in a different place, or being able to disable another autonomous platform with signal. So electronic warfare in that sense, cyber is a big part of that, because that allows you, once you have access, to manipulate the other platform. But I think autonomous platforms and signals warfare, or electronic warfare, is the future. So think Terminator. If you watch any of the videos of some of the robots that are being created at Boston Dynamics, it'll give you nightmares, right? And that's the future of warfare. And you throw it. We have a lot of folks that are just focused on creating algorithms, right? They're mathematicians who help these robots or these autonomous systems make their own decisions based on the feedback that they receive from previous decisions. And they're able to do more and more in a much smaller, with much less real estate. And so it's truly frightening what we're doing. I have conflicted that I play a role in it to an extent, but I also know that our adversaries will do the same thing if we don't.
Yeah, we could do a whole other session on just the ethics of modern warfare when you are operating a drone from Nevada that's in another country. And so war is not as hands-on as it would have been for thousands of years.
Yeah,
you're a little bit remote from the consequences of your actions.
it's a great point. One of the reasons politicians and even senior military officials are so quick to throw people at a military solution or a conflict is because they've not been on the other end of a sword, or the modern day sword, which is a rifle. And we have so few veterans in decision making roles in our government, and as senior decision makers, if you will. I don't know, just generically speaking. So people are very quick when they don't have any skin in the game, if they don't have any family that are overseas, like Marilyn mentioned earlier. They're very quick to throw these sorts of answers or solutions at these problems when they don't understand the consequences. And there's really something to be said for having people who've been there to be a part of the decision making. And when we've so tilted the scales to where it's almost completely absent of that, we make bad decisions, right? And this is just an example of how this is done in life, and personally or in corporate America all the time. It's why it's so important to have a multitude of perspectives, and not just academic or theoretical perspectives, but real perspectives at the table of stakeholders when decisions are being made.
Well, thanks so much, Roger. This was great to spend time with you.
Yeah, same here. I've enjoyed it.
Make sure everybody has the link to the book. I think I sent that out before too, but if you haven't read it, it's really well written. It's I thought the way you conveyed the story, you and your co-writer, I didn't read it in one setting. I think it was two days, but I just couldn't stop reading because it was really compelling to go through.
Well, keep the glossary at the back of the book handy, because if you're not familiar with, not just military terminology, but, specifically Army military lexicon, then, you want to have a bookmark to get back there, because we quickly transition from writing the words out to acronyms within the first couple of chapters, and you're kind of on your own to sort it out. But the original version of the book was over 600 pages, so we had to find ways to cut it down because people's attention spans are just not what they used to be. So part of that was truncating some of the language too.
Sure. Well, have a great weekend, everyone, and have a great Thanksgiving. Next week's Thanksgiving week. So enjoy your time, however you celebrate, and what will be one of the more unusual Thanksgivings in our life, I guess, as people try to figure out how to navigate family time in this year. But enjoy your week and enjoy your holiday, and we'll get back together again after Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Bless you guys. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.